3.6 Mercantilism and the uneasy beginnings of capitalism. National, market-based economic systems did not evolve naturally during mercantilism. They were created by the merchant capitalists and monarchs of Europe for their benefit. A national market system was resisted vigorously by the smaller towns and rural areas, which fought to maintain their tight regulation of local trade and preserve existing jobs. As Polanyi noted in The Great Transformation, the towns raised every possible obstacle to the formation of a national or internal market for which the capitalist wholesaler was pressing. It took deliberate actions by the state in the 1400s and 1500s to break down the fiercely protectionist policies of the towns. Once local resistance was broken, the state replaced local rules on trading and manufacturing with national rules, so mercantilism was not freewheeling, competitive market capitalism. It was tightly controlled national capitalism run by and for the merchant capitalists and monarchs. Grounded in the social hierarchies of the period. The early mercantilist countries tried to maximize the inflow of gold, an approach known as bullionism, to cement their power and wealth. To do this, they tried to maintain a trade surplus by subsidizing and encouraging exports while taxing and discouraging imports. One of the best ways to do this was to grant companies trading monopolies in specific areas of the market. If only one British merchant was allowed to purchase red dye from France, he could buy it more cheaply than if multiple British merchants were bidding for the same dye. If only one British merchant was allowed to sell red cloth in England, that merchant could sell it for the highest possible price. Trading was carefully regulated so that the system maximized the profits of the monopoly merchant capitalists and ensured an inflow of gold. Colonial empires also improved profits from trading. Resources, especially raw materials and slave labor, could be had cheaply from the colonies. The British dismantled the thriving textile industry in India and forced the colony to export raw cotton to England, where it could be used by British industries to manufacture textiles. Similar practices occurred in Africa, Asia, and the Americas, as industries in the colonies were displaced in favor of the production of raw materials for export to the colonial power. The transatlantic slave trade was a particularly horrific example of mercantilist trading patterns. Slave ships left England for West Africa carrying cloth, guns, alcohol, ironwares, and other manufactured goods. These were traded in West Africa for slaves who were captured by African chiefs collaborating with the English traders. The ships then traveled to the West Indies in the Caribbean, and later the United States, where the slaves were sold at auctions to plantation owners. The ships were then loaded with the produce from the plantations, especially commodities like sugar, coffee, tobacco, and cotton, which were brought back to England. Merchants profited from each stage of the trade, while extracting resources from Africa and the Americas. In some cases, private companies such as the Dutch East India Company were put in charge of vast colonial territories and granted the power to wage war, mete out justice, execute convicts, establish new colonies, mint coins, and so on. They exploited colonial territories ruthlessly for their own profit. Imagine how the most racist and rapacious company without any check on its behavior might exploit a country in Africa, Asia, or the Americas for its own benefit, and you will get some idea of the horrors of mercantilism. Initially, countries experienced economic growth under tightly controlled mercantilism. The expansion of markets internally within the countries and externally to their colonies enhanced profits and stimulated the development of new industries. But the control of the economy by the monarch and a handful of huge firms began to stifle the development of new firms and industries. Stimulated by the growth of trade, an emerging group of capitalists working in mining, manufacturing, and other industries chafed at the restricted, monopolized markets. They wanted more trade, greater access to domestic and foreign markets, and fewer government restrictions on their behavior. At the same time, mercantilism experienced some major economic problems. The enclosure of the common lands had created large pools of desperately poor workers without sufficient jobs or opportunities, and fluctuations in the supply of gold caused large swings in prices. Such a system, which worked well only for a small part of the population, ultimately proved to be unstable. Just as the mercantilist economy was becoming more and more untenable, Adam Smith offered a vision of how capitalism could solve the problems created under mercantilism. His vision of a lightly regulated market capitalist economy proved to be very attractive to the increasingly powerful capitalists of England in the late 1700s and early 1800s. By 1834, England had abandoned mercantilism and embarked on an experiment in market capitalism that would reshape the entire world. This is the subject of the next chapter.